This post is entitled The Apotheosis of a Peacock, or the Downfall of a Compulsive Cheater. The problem player in this is a 30-something-year-old man, his characters supposedly chaotic good. The first red flag appeared before the very first session of the very first campaign, when the player gave his level 1 character stats that were all 16 and above, with 3 20s, as well as several rare magic items. This included Dawnbreaker because, as the player argued, his Dragonborn fighter's name was Kralis Dawnscream, and he should have a sword that matched his surname. The DM told him that he should have followed her character creation instructions and lowered the stats to more appropriate levels. She'll let him keep the magic items, but only if Kralis developed an allergy to magic. In fact, she insisted upon it. The DM hoped this would teach him a lesson to not mess with his character sheet. After a few days, he finally begged her to remove both the allergy and the magic items, and she let him redo his character sheet, this time the right way. Within a couple of days, he changed it again. Old Kralis was back to having several stats soaring to 20. The DM told the player that she'll only let him keep his strength and con at that level, but since the most logical explanation for a level 1 character to be this buff was serious steroid abuse, his wisdom was now 3 as a result of Kralis' constant roid rage. Thus, he became a mound of muscle that could deal a ton of damage, but only see and hit things that were directly in front of him. Anyway, that campaign is its own story. But during the course of it, the player tried to bump his stats up at least once more, so the DM made it a routine of checking his sheets every week, at the very least to discourage him from doing it more. Another noteworthy thing, the player liked to boast, and boast often, about what a strong and intimidating character Kralis was. When it came to actual combat, however, he would refuse to do anything that involved risk. Gotta jump over a 5x6 to reach the flame skull that had the rogue pinned. The warlock and sorcerer are surrounded by a dozen skeletons. Oh, wait, now the sorcerer is 1v1ing a ghost? Kralis would shrug and say, looks like they have it handled, and then just walk away. Out of game, the player was enthused about his powerful character build, always raving over the theory of Kralis and not the reality of him, the fighter that wouldn't fight. Some of the group were planning to attend PAX Unplugged, and the DM asked if anyone would want her to do a one-shot there. The problem player was one of those that said yes. He was a mutual acquaintance of online friends, and so she had only ever played tabletop with him online. This would be the first time in person. Part of PAX Unplugged is a lending library of board games that allowed people to check and test things out. In every single game the group played that weekend, this player cheated. Every single one. His behavior included constantly keeping cards instead of discarding them, hiding cards, faking dice rolls, standing up and pretending to stretch to look at other people's hands, or outright walking behind them to peer over their shoulder, using his watch face to reflect a card in a Guess Who type game, and so much more. It was unreal how relentlessly he's cheated, almost as if he was a compulsion. Someone would call him out on one thing, to which he would go, oh, whoops, and then do the exact same thing a couple minutes later, even with people staring at him. He tried to mask his cheating by pretending to be forgetful or not knowing the rules. This behavior carried over into the D&D one-shot. He kept faking his dice rolls. The DM would see out of the corner of her eye as he slid the dice over the number of the side he wanted, use his hands to mime the motion of rolling it, and then declare the result. At one point, the character's spear was depreciated by acid, so the DM told him to write down that it now does less damage. She watched him pick up the pencil, pretend to write, then put it back down without making any marks whatsoever on the paper. She tried calling him out when she could, but his behavior was so constant that if she reprimanded every single instance, it would have derailed the whole game and spoiled the experience of everyone else at the table. The DM was indignant and vowed to never play another game with the guy again. Afterwards, word got back around to the player and he profusely apologized to the DM, admitting that he had extremely unhealthy need to win. She told him that the point of playing games isn't to win, but to have fun. And his friends aren't his competitors or rivals to defeat, they're his friends. The player promised he would never cheat again. That behavior wasn't who he really was as a person, and he would be different from then on. The DM was dubious. She was getting another campaign geared up, however, and to get some people she wanted on board together, she would also have to invite him. So she gave him one more chance. Thus, Kralis Dawnscream returned. In the previous campaign, he somehow had gotten himself into a romantic relationship with both a succubus and a doppelganger. Again, that's its own story. After one of their threesomes, Kralis went and washed himself in a spring that he knew beforehand was sacred to Saloon, desecrating it in the process. From then on, he would receive signs and omens that the goddess was gunning for him, but scoffing, declared he would never ever apologize to her. Anyway, in this new campaign, Kralis was accompanied by the baby of the succubus and doppelganger that he was tasked to take care of. The baby was a DM NPC and the party paladin, since no one was interested in playing a dedicated healer. Kralis' player was really into The Mandalorian at the time, and the DM had hoped that the baby would get him more invested into role-playing. Previously, he didn't really do much beyond participating in threesomes and accidentally destroying the village of Fandalworth. The player lost interest in Kralis after 2 or 3 sessions, and he kept forgetting the baby and leaving it in buildings and alleyways. The DM suggested that Kralis could go off on a journey somewhere to a place where he could study mindfulness and work on increasing his wisdom from 3. A yoga retreat would do the trick. Meanwhile, she would allow the player to switch his character from the pack's unplugged one-off, the Aarakocra monk cleric named Zerkek Ragewing. The DM needed to come up with a token for this character, and seeing as the player never bothered to pick one out himself, she went looking. The only description the player had provided from the Aarakocra's appearance was purple. She looked at the available options: owls, hawks, hummingbirds, etc. Then she saw the perfect one and smiled. It would not be difficult at all to get purple from Peacock Blue. The player really liked the idea of a giant man peacock, saying it would accentuate Zerkek's flirtiness. A moment of silence is in order here. For this cleric character's deity, the player had picked some random homebrew god that was a barely fleshed out ripoff of an Elder Scrolls Daedra, albeit a formless little girl version of it. This was fine for the one-off, but for a campaign the DM wanted something that would be a little bit more substantial, and preferably given her way, if needed, to rein his character in. She told him to pick a new god. After a few seconds of lazy searching, he shrugged and said he would just do one of the major good ones. A tad perturbed at his lack of effort, but not surprised, she told him that honestly, she really doesn't think he's capable of worshipping anybody or anything other than himself. In fact, as a cleric, why doesn't Zerkek worship himself as his own god? The player asked he would only serve himself? His very words, mark you. Exactly, replied the DM. Oh, the logistics wouldn't be that hard to hammer out, she assured him. Suppose the other gods were fearful and jealous of Zerkek, so they plotted against him. First they locked him inside a mortal shell, and Aarakocra on account of their very short lifespans, and then threw his infant incarnation before the gnolls to ensure he was eliminated. But Zerkek showed them. He survived and thrived amongst the gnolls, and learned there was still a tendril of power within him connected to his divinity, not dead but dormant. Only by praying to himself could his sleeping godhood hear and help. So, in order to cast spells or access cleric powers, Zerkek must beseech his own blessing and sing his own praises. The player immediately and enthusiastically agreed. Now, what on earth would Zerkek be the god of, the DM mold? The player did not answer for quite some time, so the DM ventured a suggestion. How about mirrors and reflections? He would seemingly be a minor god, but if it worked a lot like DC Comics' Mirror Master, his power would belie appearances. The player said sure, and then, right then and there, wanted to start adding mirror teleportation powers to his character sheet. The DM gently shook her head, however, and told him that at level 6, Zerkek needed to work up to them first. Thus, Zerkek, the giant, scantily clad purple peacock monk cleric, joined the party. Introduced as Kralis' very, very close tent buddy from his mercenary troop, the player nodding his assent to this description, Zerkek came to house-sit Kralis' things, while the Dragonborn journeyed to his yoga retreat in order to learn how to eat, pray, and love. As Kralis stood before the open road, only one of the other party members, the Tabaxi fighter, came out to wave goodbye to him. The rest sat inside their house in their respective rooms, waiting for him to leave. Kralis took a step, the very first step on his quest to find himself. The sky grew dark, the morning sun blocked by a blood moon. Apparently this was rather unremarkable to Kralis and his player, who didn't give a reaction and just kept trudging on. This will be the last time Kralis Dawnscream was ever seen alive. Zerkek's first outing, the player seemed to enjoy himself. The party was tasked with breaking into a safe in the upscale residences that happened to have 3 daughters, all debutantes. The plan was for the half-elf warlock to pose as a gentleman caller. He was picked since the rest of the party consisted of anthropomorphic animals, a robot, and a baby, and distract the family while everyone else snuck in and did the stealing. As an Aarakocra, Zerkek was supposed to be the warlock's wingman. When they walked through the front door, Zerkek immediately pushed the warlock to the side and shouldered into the room with the ladies, unfurling his giant peacock tail to block the warlock from entering behind him. An actual peacock block. The 3 girls gaped at him, and that's when the party realized only one of them was 18, the others all underage. The warlock whispered to just focus on the 18-year-old, but Zerkik smirked and said since he's technically a 3-year-old, they're all available to him. The rest of the mission he spent playing a liar while dropping terrible one-liners, hypnotizing the girls with his tail feathers, and at one point, casting the command spell on the 14-year-old to force her to stop crying from the sensory overload. This emerged as a trend for Zerkik. He never used the command spell on enemies, only on young women of vulnerability. For instance, the party had come upon a little girl in distress from seeing her friends died in an explosion. She had found the necklace of fireballs that had caused it, but was still in too much shock to let go. Not even attempting to console her, Zerkik used the command to force her to give it to him. The DM noticed this pattern of his and decided to test to see how far it went. The 18-year-old debutante showed up to the party's house, still enamored of Zerkik. She had run away from her parents, she said, and wanted to become his high priestess. She fell to his feet and groveled at them, praying and worshipping. At this, he started laughing. He began ordering her around, forcing her to do tiny, trivial tasks just to watch her obey him. He cackled even more when she picked up a knife and began to carve a Z into her forehead. Only after the other party members objected did he use the command spell to force her to stop. Gleefully, he told her, "You're only allowed to do what I order you to do." The next session, the girl was gone. The DM explained it away, saying she had gotten sent to finishing school by a concerned NPC. That was the extent of Zerkik's interactions with most NPCs. He never bothered to talk to the friendly ones unless they were young women, and the enemies he barely engaged in battle with, preferring to fly around on the outskirts of combat. As a cleric, the only person he would ever heal was himself. On these occasions, the DM made him go through the full motions of pulling out his holy symbol, a little hand mirror that he had to gaze into to glimpse his divine self gazing back, and praying a lengthy prayer to himself in order to cast a spell. In this whole campaign thus far, despite his previous promises, the player did not stop attempting to cheat. He at least learned how to not rejigger his stats, but during the fights he would either forget to reduce his HP when damaged, to the point the DM just did it herself, or to try and add more when he thought the DM was occupied, apparently not realizing the website they use allowed the DM to see all health bars at once and any changes made to them in real time. When one session ended after a big fight, everybody was able to level up, but since they had not taken a long rest, the DM told them to keep their health the same. She was going to give them a rest when they reconvened, but she wanted to see who would follow directions, specifically the problem player. Throughout the next week, she would periodically check on the game to monitor health levels. They all stayed the same until about 30 minutes before the next session started. Zerkik's player snuck in to bring his character back up to full health, left, and then came back in after everyone else arrived, pretending to be late. The DM called him out on his antics repeatedly, but nonetheless, he continued. On top of that, with each week the player became more and more disrespectful. He kept joking that he was just going to play The Witcher 3 instead of showing up for sessions, and sometimes music from the game could be heard over his mic. He was also always insinuating that the DM himself was cheating on her own dice rolls. She had anticipated he would project his own behavior onto her, as narcissists are wont to do. So she always used the site's 3D dice roller and was open about her rolls, only keeping some NPC perception checks hidden, and his character did little more than show up, barely contributing to combat or roleplay, except, of course, when an emotionally vulnerable young woman was in the vicinity. And from some of the things he would say, it became more and more clear to the DM that the player considered her, since she was the dungeon master, the big bad of the game. The cheating was him thinking he was outwitting her, the final boss monster, thereby besting her and becoming the winner of Dungeons & Dragons. Needless to say, the DM was very tired of it all, but the player was chummy with most of the other people in the group. Up to this point, his cheating consisted of hundreds of little things he would just wave off as him just forgetting or simply pretending to be stupid. Far too many sessions would start with him saying, "Guys, I forgot how to play the game again." The DM knew he was no idiot, just egotistical in a way which is simulated idiocy. To kick him out without others leaving, he had to do something big and blatant, something he couldn't possibly justify. He was capable of it. She had seen it in person at PAX Unplugged. She just had to watch and wait. At the end of one of the sessions, the same one it so happens that saw Zerkik laughing as the 18-year-old girl carved his initial into her forehead, the party was in a new section of the city tracking down a Nimblewright. From a nearby alleyway stepped out a beautiful red-headed woman, just drop-dead gorgeous. She had wild curly hair, freckles, and the look of fierceness very evocative of, well, Triss Merigold from the Witcher series. In fact, why, she looked exactly like Triss. Zerkik shot straight toward her, landing and unfurling his big peacock tail to trap her in the alley. Her eyebrows, and everyone else's, shot up. She looked him up and down incredulously, then told him he really wasn't her type. Zerkek leaned in and smiled. "That's what they all say at Faft." Here the half-elf warlock ran up, valiantly tried to defuse the situation, asking politely for her name and, what landmarks can be found in this section of town. The woman, still standing at Zerkek, gestured behind her. "He's more my type. And by the way, the name's Ketibri." A drow with 2 scimitars stepped out from the shadows behind her. End of session. 1 week. 1 whole week. All that time, Zerkek's player had to search and strategize on how to deal with this development, and he did indeed spend some of it reading up on his character. When the next session started, the player revealed his master plan. Zerkek's mouth opened, and a stream of racial slurs about drow started pouring out. Everybody's jaws dropped. His intention, his conceit, was that by spouting about how awful and terrible the drow are, he could goad this one into not attacking Zerkek, and thereby avoid stereotypical drow behavior. He tried to insult Drizzt Do-Erden with racial slurs into not beating him up. Drizzt ran and Zerkek engaged his classic tactic of flying off to stick to the outskirts of combat. Away the Peacock men flew, gloating about how Drizzt couldn't possibly reach him. Suddenly, a black panther materialized above him. It grappled Zerkek, the weight of it dragging him down to the ground where Drizzt awaited. The scimitars began wailing into the birdman, blood and feathers everywhere. While this was going on, the half-elf warlock found the other companions of the hall. With Regis, he rolled an extremely high persuasion check to help him stop the fight. The 2 of them ran around back and forth between the others to enlist their aid as well. Several successful persuasion checks later, the group of them together managed to convince Drizzt that Zerkek wasn't worth his time and he had better things to do. They all walk off, leaving Zerkek a bloody mess on the ground with 2 HP. The only reason he was still alive was because of the warlock and Drizzt getting 3 threes in a row on his attack rolls. Zerkek took this as further evidence of his divinity. The nimble right the party had been looking for jumped out just then and plucked one of the Peacock man's tail feathers, reducing him to 0 hit points and promptly knocking him out. During this entire encounter, the player had still been massaging his health meter, but again, nothing obvious or overt that couldn't be explained by him being a quote-unquote aged. The next week there was no session since it was PAX East. Most of the group would be attending, including the DM and the problem player. The DM was there to enjoy herself and not interested in any drama whatsoever. She did put a genuine effort to be cordial. A good time seemed to be had. Could there be hope for this player? The next session after everyone returned, only a couple of hours before the start, Zerkek's player texted the group chat. He will not be able to attend. His wording went this way. A streamer friend of his really needed help running her stream that night, and he had promised her he could do it because he's such a helpful guy. But unfortunately, he's just way too helpful for his own good, and oh no, he had overpromised himself yet again, trying to be helpful as many people as possible, and so unfortunately he won't be able to make it to that night's D&D session after all. The DM asked him what did the streamer need help with. The player immediately changed his story, saying, he had promised the streamer that he would be there to support her. One of the other players then reprimanded him, so he backpedaled further. You know what, he said, it's going to be really tough, but he thinks he can juggle his commitments and be able to make it. The DM then asked, since he wasn't going to be able to be there to help, would the streamer even be able to do her stream by herself? To this, he finally admitted that the streamer was just going to make a Sims version of himself, and he wanted to watch. The DM was far more offended at this series of insultingly stupid excuses than whether or not he had actually shown up. If he had simply just said at the start he wasn't able to attend, no explanation needed, she would have been perfectly fine with that. Life can be crazy, people don't need to explain themselves to her. If they do feel they need to, she preferred they be honest and didn't belittle her intelligence by dressing it up as some sort of altruistic urge. The ensuing session began as the Paladin's baby's first birthday party, but quickly became a big barroom brawl. It started with the arrival of the baby's parents, the succubus and the doppelganger, aka Krallis' threesome buddies. A box in hand and singing happy birthday, they lifted the lid and poured out the present to their child. Building blocks made from the cubed flesh of Krallis. A slugfest erupted, and since they were stuck indoors, Zerkek couldn't do his typical little flying away tactic. Being the succubus's true love, the doppelganger was also a vampire. Of course. At one point in the fight, it filled the room with a swarm of bats. Zerkek tried to fly through this too, actually, for the very first time ever, heal another player. He probably just wanted to distance himself from the succubus, though. Dozens of opportunity attacks by dozens of bats later, his health was very low. The player was messing with Zerkek's HP count so much that the DM just had to lock him out of readjusting it. Someone used the web spell to ensnare all of the bats. Despite Dex being one of his highest stats, Zerkek failed this and the saving throw, and got caught in it too. Another player lit the web on fire to burn the bats. Zerkek continued to fail every single saving throw to escape. The Peacock was trapped. his arms held aloft in a Christ-like pose. The flames wreathed his form. When a god burns, is it holy fire? Then the problem player did it. The big thing. Capital B, capital T. He had a potion of healing on him, and he declared that he was going to down it.
19 health back,
he exclaimed. The DM narrowed her eyes. 19 from 2d4 plus 2? She asked him where the roll was. He said it wasn't on the screen. He had used his physical dice to roll it. If the player wanted her to be the bad guy, well, she can certainly be the bad guy. The DM showed her hand and employed the loophole she had given herself with the player's own permission. When the player had agreed to his cleric worshipping himself as his own deity, he had also given assent to the premise that the other gods, out of fear and jealousy, banded together to bring Zerkik down. That is, every single god in the Forgotten Realms hates Zerkik to so much of a degree that they all put aside their considerable differences with one another to unite against him. From now on, every time the player cheats, a D100 will roll to determine which god will descend to battle Zerkik in hand-to-hand combat. When Zerkik dies, the god might be inclined to resurrect him, the story reason being that they wish for him to continue having a capacity for suffering. This will last until the player has stopped cheating for an extended period of time. The only way the player can continue in this campaign is under this condition. The player quit. He didn't even try to defend himself. Everybody else stayed. Story-wise, Zerkik's disappearance was explained as him befalling a fate reminiscent to Narcissus. While praying to himself in his mirror, he got lost in his own reflection. Now he wanders his divine realm, the mirror maze, the only denizens of which are the thousands upon thousands of instances of his own image within its walls. So, this player seems a lot less like a 30-something-year-old Dungeons & Dragons player who's been playing for many years, and more like a 15-year-old playing a video game and cheating at every single step of the way because he's just too afraid to lose, and he just doesn't want to lose no matter what he does. It's kind of annoying, and it's kind of rude. It's mostly rude because you're not at a table to win. You're at a table to play a game with your friends. You don't have any enemies at the table. You have friends at the table. So it's kind of hard to read through a story of a guy just being just a jerk the entire time, just because he wants to win Dungeons and Dragons, that's not a thing that you can do. If this guy was at my table, I would just kick him out. I would probably try to do the same thing that the DM did. This DM was very kind, and she was very sweet, and she was very clever at laying down little tiny little things to kind of make it so that this was inevitable if he continued his course of action. So, hats off to the DM. The DM totally outsmarted this guy. He played right into her hand. He was being a fool. So, what's the main takeaway for this? Don't cheat at D&D. Don't try to win Dungeons & Dragons. Don't be that person who has to win no matter what and sees everything around them as their enemy. You're playing a game with your friends. Just accept that that's what it is and play the game with your friends instead of trying to beat them or the dungeon master no matter what. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, give me a like, leave a comment down below if you want me to do more. Subscribe if you're not already. I love you. I'll see you next time. Bye.